Okay. Mr. Rittenhouse, can you take us live? Okay, thank you. Well, welcome and thank you very much to the January 19th Finance and Capital Management Committee. Board members, President Valerie McKittrick, Dr. Akbar, Diana Autry, and Dr. Hall, Superintendent James, and myself. We have one member outstanding, so hopefully he's able to join. The agenda was posted last week, and we've been adding to it every day, and understanding we have other meetings tonight. I want to get to a couple items first. Item 2.01, the reason I've listed ESSER Funds 2.0 first is to plant the seed with you for a couple reasons. One, as you filter down through the Finance Committee agenda and we begin to discuss these, ESSER 2.0 is going to have a major impact on everything that we do. And I mean everything that we do in finance. From academic recovery plans, which we'll be discussing as we have been discussing and will be discussing into the future, returning to in-person school, the impact on our general finances and levy. Board members should be joining here as soon as possible. We need to keep that in mind and in perspective, because it will, any funds allocated and that come in front of the board need to be filtered with the perspective of academic recovery. One, because it's federally charged to do that. Two, because it's obviously prudent in what we're all here to do. But three, we need to develop a plan for these monies to extend them and to achieve the values or the goals associated with these monies. And I'll write that up for you as I have to keep in the memo form and let you edit it. I'll let you kind of push back to me, because I'll put those values at the very top to say academic recovery. So everything that we do is going to be academic recovery. There's an opportunity to relieve the pressure on general fund. We'll do that. But academic recovery, academic recovery, academic recovery, before and after school programming, in person, in class, smaller class sizes, additional, whatever that looks like into summer school, right? Could be additional technology to assist academic recovery. That should be the filter in which, and the reason I want to push so hard on this is we don't need anyone else creating a narrative for what the headline was of $40 million, right? We don't need anyone else holding that narrative, creating it, telling us what we're going to be doing with it, saying that it's going to be, oh, it's just going to be dumped into general funds, so you may or may not need a levy in the future. And one of the reasons I'm coming out so hard on that is I just came off a call with some of the advocacy specialists from the state of Ohio. And I can tell you right now that the legislature has already asked to see districts' cash balances as of last year and moving into next year. And the reason they're asking is there's a school funding formula afoot, and they're trying to figure out, well, should we reduce the school funding formula? That's when somebody else controls the narrative, what can happen when money is intended to be for kids in their recovery. And so I wanted to plant that seed first. We filter that through all of our agenda items, and we are very deliberate. Even I'm reporting on that at Finance Committee, reporting on that at the committee of the whole. But I know that's what David and his team are doing and have been doing, and we've all been doing. So I just want to kind of make some public statements there. Any feedback, questions on ESSER 2.0? I don't have the official allocation yet. And I've sent out that spending guidance to you, that side-by-side spending guidance. If you don't have it, I can send it back out again. Anything on ESSER 2.0? All right, I moved the agenda around just a little bit. Superintendent James, could you talk about the master's facility plan, kind of high level review? We know that finance and capital management, that's kind of under our wheelhouse, so to speak, and just to be sensitive of your timing.
Sure. So with the buildings that did not qualify for the state match that are left, like North High School, Miller South, Piper, Firestone Park, the Reedinger building, and a few others out there, we really need to do a facilities master plan for those. Now, these facilities would have to be paid for out of our own funds, whether it's a warm, safe, and dry approach or complete, rebuilding. We may have to look at moving some things around. But we will need to engage with a consultant to help us put that together, because part of a facility master plan is also calculating the cost of whether we're going to go with a renovation or a complete redo of a building. And so I'm having some discussions with our facilities folks about that, and would like to I'll bring the board some options on how we can proceed moving forward with that. But until we actually get that plan, we'll still have to address, some of the repairs that buildings have. I know there's been an inquiry regarding a sports facility and a project that I believe Firestone has, and we can roll some of that into this facility plan as well.
Looks like Mr. Bravo had a question.
Yeah, thanks. So what is as we're closing out these different segments too, and we're recapturing funds, do we have a current estimate on, number one, do we have a current estimate on maybe what we're estimating will be left? Is there a need, or will part of this process be reaching out to the city as we find out what the remaining income tax above and beyond the debt service that'll be bringing in, like what that value is and how that will play in? And I guess because of those two things, the master facilities planning committee that we used to have that also would involve the city, will they also be back at the table since we will have remaining local funds, or like how does that work?
Yeah, so as we close out the various segments, which has not been a quick process, there will be balances that are remaining. But remember, we still have the Kenmore Garfield project. And so the way that the commission will work is any issues that we might have with that building before it's done those funds would come out of that to cover any overruns or any other changes that could crop up. There is a pot of money that the city has to keep in reserves, and the COC accumulating fund, I believe. Right. And those funds typically wouldn't get released until after the year 2030, when the 30-year bond expires, and then that income tax will, if I'm not mistaken, falls off, and then there should be a refund to the district for what excess is sitting there. I don't think any of that is really going to help us with some of the critical needs that we have on some of the facilities that we're still using, but we'll need some expertise in determining, how much those will cost, and whether some of that funding that's from some of the finished segments as they are reconciled, and that money moves back into our LFI, whether we'll be able to do some of those projects or all of those projects.
Okay, thank you.
As we formalize that plan, obviously that takes some time, but as we formalize that plan, we can include the balance of the Facilities Commission projects that Superintendent mentioned about transferring to LFI. I'm pretty confident in saying that it will not be enough to do a whole building. Not even on its own. It could be used for some renovations and some upgrades. And likely we would not receive the kind of matches that we received 60 cents on the dollar, frankly, from the state of Ohio in terms. So it is time to do that facilities master plan, both academic and athletic, and to kind of get a sense of where we need to move into the future. Those are multi-year projects, but something that we have a goal for in 2021. Speaking of goals, also, this meeting serves as a bit of a transition from 2020 chairs of Finance Committee and 2021 chairs of Finance Committee, and one being very sensitive that we did a kind of a year in review at the December meeting. And as we pick up steam with equity dashboards, Forecast 5, our new policies, Advance APS, a lot of which we're going to kind of walk through today, really would like help. And I mean, I would like your help in identifying those priorities of which we want to document. And I need that for my office and helping communicate both back to you for this feedback loop and also the superintendent, so that I can report to the superintendent on these various metrics. That's how the narratives are born and shared with the public. So I want to make sure I'm hitting those. So I will really need your help. I'll reach out to you, make phone calls. We might want to schedule another meeting and try to get some of that done in this first quarter. I've got some ideas and suggestions about those meetings so we can pick up a little bit more steam. But we do have a ton of things going on. The ESSER 2.0 is it's going to dictate a lot of what we do. So just back up to that first point, the ESSER 2.0. As you walk through today's agenda and we talk in the next few days, think about those priorities that we want to solidify. I'm talking about turning this into a mini strategic plan. I don't want everybody to get worried about a strategic plan. I just need it organized so that I can direct and help focus resources in the areas that we all choose. And so it could look like it could be like a master's facility plan post OSFC, our facilities commission project. When do we want it done by? Do we want it done by June, or do we want it done in 2021? Obviously, that includes a funding component that we don't have. So we need to start putting those in orders as we get back closer to school. All right. Under legislative update on, I'm going to share my screen. Everybody can see my screen under administrative content and advocacy page. Just wanted to let you know that we made an advocacy page. It'll be under the district tab. This is not live, but I wanted to see what this might look like. Is active in state and federal issues. There's an S missing. Concerning education and potential impact on students in Ohio. And this page is for staff and community to be informed about current and future legislation. So I've already got that legislative tracking tool out there. Updates from these meetings will be posted as we begin to write on the Fair School Funding Plan or Ed Choice and Vouchers and Community School. We have letters to the community or letters to the legislature. Those can be posted here. And we may want to blend those web pages in there. So I'd love your feedback again as this picks up momentum, but I wanted to show you some action from our last meeting. If you look on the left-hand part of the toolbar, you see the equity and transparency site. We may want to merge these a little bit more too, because ClearGov and what we're going to be doing with the equity dashboards and the reporting dashboards. This is really slow to load. And hopefully you've seen all of this where you can see per pupil expenses, revenue, certain areas, and analysis. This is a free website that we connect to as part of a transparency effort. I just wanted to show you what we've listed on our homepage. And as soon as I get this a little bit more polished, I will go live with it and let you know. Okay, on the equity dashboards and equity charts, and then the advanced APS, those two partner with each other as a charge from the board. I've taken a stab at some of these, and and again, I can't see you now since I'm sharing my screen. But I think the first place that we need to go with the equity dashboard is per pupil expenses. And Ms. Autry and Dr. Hall talked a lot about this last year in terms of there is for lack of a better definition terminology, there's a typical student. And then there's students with those needs above and beyond what a typical student is. And start to get some normalized data around what a multiplier might look like. Whether the multiplier is by building, is by race, is by economically disadvantaged, is by limited English proficient, whether it's by special education, whether it's by specialty school. I think the first place, and I'd love some feedback on the equity dashboard because as you can see, I can make a lot of different charts. But we need to, again, start to tell our story the way we want it told. I think the first place we need to do is talk about per pupil expenses and start to identify, hopefully you're seeing my screen here, I'll enlarge it. Board member and I talked about this last year, just, hey, give me a quick idea what I Promise School spending looks like to the rest of the district. And this is a perfect way to talk through that multiplier and then get into the nuances as Ms. Autry and Dr. Hall talked about with more senior teachers at one place versus another. But I guess I'm looking for some head nods here. Let's go to per pupil expenses. Let's group them in elementary, intermediate, secondary. Then let's add another column for if it's specialty, whether it's I Promise, whether it's special ed, what units it may have at that building, which may cost more, if it's high base space, if it's lower class sizes because of college and career academies, which is also career and technical education, or how it's funded differently. Then let's start getting through those multipliers. I'll pause and kind of take some feedback there, please.
Hey, Ryan, this is Derek. So a couple of things I just want to point out. So first off, I think it's important to your point to be able to accurately calculate that per pupil expenditure, right? And then kind of the next step to determine, well, are there aspects of it that we should be normalizing? So for example, should we normalize the experience factor, right? Do we come up, do we say, all right, well, let's normalize the difference between a teacher with 7 years of service and a teacher with 17, right? Which I think was the difference between Ellen and Bookville, right? Do we normalize that? And I'm not saying that we should. I'm simply saying that, it's about trying to get to that an accurate per pupil number. And does that calculation require normalizing certain variables? And then I think the second thing, just for some additional context, I think I've shared with some of you in the past that I'm doing this certificate in educational finance at Georgetown University right now through the McCourt School, and I've picked up some new vocabulary in the last month or so around equity, within the finance standpoint. They use terms like horizontal equity and vertical equity. And just a quick sort of how those things are defined, and this is what we're really looking to discover, right? Is horizontal equity or inequity is defined as similarly situated students that have different amounts of money spent upon them, right? So imagine student A, student B have the exact same attributes, right? But yet I'm spending $3,000 in additional monies per people on student A, and $3,000, and $10,000 on student B. So 13,000 on A, 10,000 on B. So that's an example of horizontal equity, right? So similarly situated students having different amounts of money spent upon them, right? And then there is vertical equity, which looks at, okay, like I have two schools, that have the same number of students, does that mean that I should be spending the same amount of money on each of those schools, right? And so a differential would suggest vertical inequity, right? So I think part is about us learning some new vocabulary, context-wise. So as an example of that, we talk a lot about the I Promise School. Well, we know, the assumption would be, based upon some of the data that's been shared out already, is that, the I Promise School is spending more money per pupil, than other schools in Akron with similarly situated students. So that would be an example of, assuming that's true, that would be an example of horizontal inequity, right? I mean, if that's what's going on. So, we have, and the great thing about the I Promise School is that, we do have a model where they are, providing additional resources, obviously, from the foundation that goes into it. And we can look to see, all right, well, what results are they getting, right? So which gets to my last point, which is, is we have to be thinking about, what results are desirable for each group as well, right? So what am I expecting to get from a result standpoint for my, for the monies that I'm spending per pupil, so that's kind of in my mind, kind of a step-by-step, how I think about it. And I see, Ryan, that you've got up here, I Promise School and Barber and Helen Arnold. So it looks like from what you're showing here that on the surface, it would appear that Barber, has more money per pupil spent than even the I Promise School.
Right.
So am I reading?
You are, right? And so the question then becomes, what are we doing at Barber, right? And we know those students are at the highest risk and special needs. And that's probably not an out of place figure in Ohio in terms of special needs and the highest of our special needs. We have students obviously that we have spent six figures on in Ohio.
Yeah.
It's just the reality of that. But when you're looking at an average, and those three buildings, obviously we need to do more comprehensive research, but to the three elementaries to the right that I've highlighted to the left of I Promise School, above and beyond in the nation right now, they're saying above and beyond a typical student, those students who are economically disadvantaged take a minimum of a 30% multiplier on top of base funding. Mm-hmm. And so as we, Dr. Halls, we normalize that as we come up and kind of filter out and make all things equal, how can we get there, right? So, and then we can start to track or compare, because we have some results, obviously, of the I Promise School and talk about that.
Yeah. So Ryan, a couple of things real quick, and then I'll defer to the rest of the group too. I'm sure that they've got questions as well. But so for example, like a Barber, so for example, this is where you look at this expense, right? Say, all right, well, the per pupil is X, right? So this is why I was saying earlier, what component of the delta is attributable to a differential in teacher experience, right? Would be the question, right? The other question I would ask here is, all right, looking at Barber, does Barber compare, and this is where we get back to trying to get to the similarly situated student question, right? So Barber may have 274 kids, but does Barber have, and I don't know the answer, and I don't know the answer to this question, but does Barber have any special ed units or units where we've got, behavioral and or physically disabled students who are attending, which would make, because I don't know that the I Promise School has students who would be in the a special ed or physically disabled sort of categories. And I'm sure not, I'm a little bit rusty on the terminology, but so that's what I'm saying before, even getting to the similarly situated student part, right? Because we may need to say, okay, at Barber, there's 274 kids, but there's 58 kids that are not similarly situated to the 338 at the I Promise School. So when you pull those 58 kids out, now what does the per pupil spend look like, right? So again, and those are just sort of high level kind of, questions as we're thinking about how we look at these numbers. Because my mom used to work at Betty Jane, I think, out in, so I know Betty Jane, had a large number of and again, with BH or SBH kids out there, or just kids that kids who were felt within the special ed spectrum. So again, so again about the profile, we want to look to see what is our breakdown by type of students in those schools, and then trying to get to an apples to apples comparison. So, so just some, you asked for feedback. So there's just some thoughts.
No, it's great. No, I appreciate it. Stop sharing my screen. So to our chairs, as that's the momentum that we were heading in terms of equity dashboard. I suggest that we do stay on the per pupil track. Obviously normalize them for the actual apples to apples comparison. And then we can start to get into programmatic, I think, very quickly. So I'll have a model for you at our next meeting. I think I'll be able to do that with our tools. And then we can, just take a couple of those on the screen to have a discussion about Barber IPS and the standard elementary school non-specialty, so that we can see what that looks like.
And Ryan, to that point too, is, just anybody that happens to be sort of watching this, I know that we're streaming live, this conversation isn't about, pointing fingers or saying that anybody is doing anything wrong. It's just about all of us as a collective trying to be, trying to get smarter over time, especially in the changing society, trying to be more sensitive to things like equity, right? Which is what we spend a lot of time talking about. And understanding that equity, like all things, has a financial component to it that we have to be able to understand. So the more work that we can do to elucidate, if you will, some of the underlying sort of variables that contribute possibly to horizontal or vertical inequities, the better I think we're all going to be sort of moving forward about and understanding, and also educating the community that equity doesn't mean equal. And really trying to address because a lot of people, I think, tend to view equity as I'm taking from one to give to another. And that's not what this conversation is about at all. So anyway, so I just want to make sure that was on the record, for anybody that, maybe, sort of tuning in. So. Great.
Before we move on again, equity dashboard is one of those items. I want to pair it with the Advance APS. If it's okay, if you do have comments about equity dashboard, just jump in and stop. But let's look at Advance APS together and highlight. I'm going to share my screen again. Highlight those components of Advance APS that Finance Committee can assist with. And I've got it highlighted on the screen. So establish a financial reporting system and process to report academic return on investment for the academic goals established by this plan, including the return on investment for major technology initiatives under the current remote learning environment. Our Finance Committee will work in the first quarter of 2021 on this goal and provides the framework sample report for reporting. We look at cluster building and program level data. And I think we talked a lot about doing that and the investment that we've made. Obviously, we're fortunate that the district made an initiative 3+ years ago to go 1-to-1. Outside of some infrastructure and some hotspots and connectivity in our community's residents, we haven't, I would say we're ahead of the curve. And then the other financial component, establish a financial reporting system and process for equity-related reporting. Items to consider. Obviously, we can add to this. Per pupil expenditure reporting. Equity conversion investment where needed, what we just got done talking about. Transparency and spending, I talked about blending those two on the website. And then the overlay of the public health data. And I think the idea there, unless one of you is the architects for that comment, the public health data is just finding a way to share this in real lifetime. Obviously now this is going to be a permanent part of our lives. So I think those two, unless anybody wants to have discussion about it, in regards to the advanced APS and the equity dashboard. Those complement each other. And I think we'll, outside of the academic return on investment, which I believe is step 2. So we need to look at the spend, look at it on an individual student basis, normalize it so that we can compare apples to apples, identify weaknesses, differences, and then follow up with the board community about this is the investment made or will be made, and this is the kind of outcome it's had or will have. Any questions before we move on?
Yes, Ryan, it's more of a comment.
Please.
Just along the same lines of what Derek was talking about. So when we're comparing these schools, I think it's important, at least for me, I know, because I'm not familiar with all 40 some odd schools that we have, but when we're comparing them, I'd like to see like the racial breakdown of each of those schools, if we're doing it by schools or by cluster. I think that would be important to look at as well when we're comparing them.
Excellent. And I know Mr. Bravo's on the call as well. We made some headway. I would say we had a lot of momentum prior to COVID in terms of building level dashboards. And I'd like to add to yours, Ms. Autry, that not only racial breakdown, but let's look at the percentage of special needs, English learners. Let's look at specialists. Let's list, maybe as this is taking shape, I actually do have a model I'll share with you, the demographics of that building, where it is, the percentage of special needs. Let's put all of that at the top before we start to get into the per pupil expenses. I like that.
Yeah. And I'll also add this one additional layer, which yeah, now or later, but went to Nashville at the college and career academies. Like, that's the best way for me to explain it. I don't know if it really was called a conference, but where we learned a lot about college and career academies. Mm-hmm. One of the things that came out of that was the principals talked a lot about having control over their finances and different decisions that they were able to make under the college and career academies that they weren't able to make before. I don't know how relevant that conversation is for our district and how much of the funds, so once you break it all down, how much of it is, Title I funds that need to be spent on, obviously Title I areas, and then how much of it is, principal controlled, where they make the decisions on what areas it's spent on. So I think that would be good to look at as well.
Yeah.
And again, maybe that's differently.
No, I think it can be built right into this.
Yeah, I think Dr. Hubbard, to that point, I had a similar recollection, and I do think it ties in because there's a certain part of this conversation, that certainly there's a finance part, but finance and operations always go hand in hand, right? So if a building principal, the argument goes that they're in the building every day, right? They know their building better than anybody else knows their building, right? And so allowing them, to have a bit more autonomy in how they address some of the problems or challenges in their building is something that was really brought up a lot when we were in Nashville. And I think that one of the things that I didn't really have a great understanding for at the time, and I'm still, I think, sort of feeling my way through this, is, within APS, how would we talk about, and again, this is not something that we have to get into the weeds now, right? I'm not asking this question now to be answered, but I'm saying it out loud as something to think about in our current environment, because I know to Dr. Hubbard's part, they did have, the high school principals did have more control over how some of their funds were spent, maybe whether it was Title I or other pots of money. But there's also enhanced accountability for those for those campus principals as well, right? So hey, so with additional, control comes additional responsibility and accountability, and they all had to present to their board, every year a plan. Hey, here are the, here's what's going well, here's what's not going so well. Here's how we're, here's my plan for how I'm going to allocate resources to address X, Y, and Z opportunities. And that was a yearly presentation that that was made. So I guess come around full circle. What I don't have a good grasp on, and which I'd like to understand sort of, more maybe offline, is to talk through about, well, what does current state look like here within APS, at least at the high school level, around, accountability, vis-a-vis control of, of each individual school sort of financial budget. So, but again, so I think it ties in, but again, I think that's something I'm interested in hearing more about as well.
Definitely future meeting. I'll write that in, and we can kind of talk through, compare and contrast the top-down process versus building-based budgets, and kind of the blend of how we do things in Akron and in Ohio.
Yeah. And Ryan, that might be a cross-functional meeting with finance and instructional policy. That might be, because again, not wanting to address the finance in a silo and not wanting to address the operational component of this in a silo. I mean, there may be, Dr. James and Dr. McWilliams-Woods and others may have, additional insights that they have about sort of what we do current state, and about maybe the pros and cons of what Dr. Akbar and I described about what we saw in Nashville. So that might be something where maybe that's a topic for a called a crossover event, at some point. So just food for thought.
I like it. This is very, very helpful. All the comments. Obviously I have a goal for my department and me, so I don't lose my mind. I'm going to have to produce a tangible format. We've been talking about this for a while. It's time. I think we have the software to do that. We have the support to do that. So I'm anxious to get this into draft form. So hold me accountable. We'll get to it.
Got this.
I'm sorry, Mr. Bravo.
Oh, no, go ahead. Somehow I just zoomed my entire screen and I only see my buttons at the bottom. So hang on one sec. No, I was just agreeing with you, Ryan. It's really exciting. This has been like 4 years in the making. So this is really exciting that we're getting close, and I think it needed a little bit of a kick. So the actions that this board took last year around the, racism as a public health crisis, and the work on the equity policy has really given it like the kick that it needs to kind of get over the finish line. So this is very exciting.
And we could report on components, individual components of this. We could report on it. We just didn't have the mechanisms like a Forecast 5 to put it all together.
Yeah.
And then the next step after that, thinking down the road a little bit, is making it live time and being able to have an interactive community tool, right? That's the next step. But we're getting there.
And if I could add one other thing, I've been also curious about the different in which we, how we staff our buildings. I know Dr. James at one point said there was a MOU with I Promise for how they do their school staffing, and I believe he said Bookduel, and maybe there's another school as well. I can't remember all the different schools, but my point is, there's some different staffing structures in place at different schools compared to the model that's used at the majority of schools. And I think noting that so we can see that nuance will be helpful because, it'll be easy for us to potentially conflate what's happening at Barber, for example, and Cyberling when I don't know if this is true, but by the positionality of where Barber is, they have a lot of different challenges that Cyberlink may not have
Right.
as intensively. They still have them, I'm sure, but it may not be as intensively. So maybe they're doing some things differently than a Cyberlink, and so we can't fully look at them the same. And these are just hypotheticals because I don't know that that's to be the case, but I know Dr. James mentioned some differences before, and that'd be nice to be able to look at this as well.
Great. Well, great discussion, everyone. This is very helpful in identifying the priorities of how we're going to move forward with this reporting. If there are no other questions or comments, I'm going to move on to 3.03 and share my screen. It's been a really busy year, so I don't know to what level all board members have seen our investment reports. And so for now, you'll start to get these monthly. If I haven't included them, I apologize. We do calculate the return on our investment portfolios. And the reason I brought it with me tonight is to show you the feedback loop of the board policy that we're going to forward to legal and policy, hopefully after this meeting. So at the top part of the report, we do a very quick economic and market update. Not a lot of comments here, just in terms of we look at the U.S. Treasuries, and in the middle section, you can see the yield curve. It's that kind of where rates and yields are. On the right is a quick summary of the amount of money that we have invested, our weighted average maturity, so how long we take those funds out for investment period. And that's important because it's governed by statute and board policy. So I'll kind of show you take you through the feedback as we get to the board policy a little bit later. And then in the middle of that, there is my cursor's highlighting over yield. Now we're doing quite well, comparatively speaking, to where rates are. But you can see that our weighted average maturity is keeping these investments extremely short. And prior to COVID, we may have had a weighted average maturity between 1.5 and 2.25 years out. So we invest in a treasury or commercial paper or something out 2 years. And that's kind of the sweet spot of yield. We didn't invest or have an active portfolio managed prior to about 5 years ago. And with the board's help, we changed the board policy and started to invest. The general fund, construction funds, and permanent improvement account summary is down here with some real dollars and cents attached to it. So it shows you the value of what we're bringing to our taxpayers, our construction funds, and our permanent improvement. And a quick note there, I did take a few weeks ago a municipal securities class and certificates, and now, and according to statute and law, I can invest in some municipal securities, which frankly have the best yields. They just happen to be really short. So we're talking 3 to 5 months, 3 to 6 months, maybe. So if this is helpful, I'll start including it in your packet. Transfers and subsidies. I know that's super small on your screen. This is just an FYI. I just wanted you to know, those of you who closed the last fiscal year know in June that every year a few funds we have to subsidize. It's not uncommon in Ohio. It's very common. And we look at athletics. Almost every school district in Ohio subsidizes athletics. The reason you see it as a subsidy is we're required to keep it outside of general fund. It runs in a deficit, and then we settle up at the end of the year. And then any fundraising dollars and those kind of things offset it. So we net the difference. We sometimes fund district liability. It could be the legal assistance fund internally. Sometimes unemployment, because unemployment has been covered mostly by ESSER and federal funds. We haven't had to have any subsidies in that regard. But you will see this administrative content on the next board agenda. Anytime we do a fund-to-fund transfer, we put it on the board agenda. I just didn't want you to be surprised and wanted to give you a little bit of background there. Levy discussion. Again, we can have as robust a discussion as you would like, just to get everybody engaged and make sure that we keep this in front of us each and every meeting. Obviously, I did a somewhat of a summary report as it related to ESSER funds and the impact and the current state of financial affairs. We need to keep a really close eye on this. We need to report it out. We need to get prepared for the May forecast. We need to develop this academic recovery plan, get those finances embedded in the books of what they look like over the next couple of years. I'm sure they will be multiple seven figures. How much of that $40 million and how quick of that $40 million remains to be seen. And so tomorrow morning, let's see, Thursday morning, I'll have my call with Ohio 8. We'll begin to discuss plans internally, what dollars we use first, how to spend down ESSER 1.0, what areas, and then we're going to share some plans, as well as I'm sure the superintendents are doing on their calls. So on the levy front, I don't have a lot to report on that other than we need to be prepared to have those recovery plans solidified, finances tied up and reflected in the forecast. So that's a lot to do because we have to hit a mark of how it'll impact this year's books and then the next 2.5 years books. And then make some decisions on that heading into the summer about whether or not we want to be on the ballot in November. Any questions on the levy side?
Nope.
Okay. Hearing and seeing none. The next item is, I just wanted to list, I've been getting quite a few phone calls for reappraisal, tax abatements, higher home values. I'm listing that report so that you can see and give the board an opportunity either to ask some questions, and maybe I'll start it just briefly. So the questions I've been receiving from media and outlets and in various communities are, so is Akron Public Schools foregoing revenue in tax abatements? And why are my property tax bills going up when others are coming online not paying tax bills? And so I want to give a little bit of a background, and I'm requesting some information from Summit County and I have to disaggregate it. But over the past decade or more, Akron Public Schools, with the city limits being fairly well built out, an older housing stock of which and the global economic crisis of 2008, we haven't seen increasing home values since 2008. This is the first reappraisal that we've had really positive numbers. And I think that's shocking, right? It's a little shocking to people where they're now seeing tax bills go up. And when tax bills go up, it's not as clear cut as this article highlights. Well, then everybody's tax bills go up and then the school's revenue goes up. It's not that simple. It is a mechanism of our school funding formula. It's a mechanism of House Bill 920. When property values rise, House Bill 920 rolls back the millage on homes. And what happens is what this article highlights is you shift monies to different tax structures to different pockets. And this reappraisal process that we have in what's called sales ratio is how it's determined. So they take the median price and the number of sales, and sometimes it peaks and valleys with really low interest rates. And that's what's given to the Ohio Department of Taxation, then given back to local counties for them to determine what this real estate reappraisal market looks like. And so I just want to highlight the article and then kind of focus some of the answers to the tax abatement question. This board, previous boards have been very engaged in the community discussion regarding tax abatements. So this tax abatement legislation citywide happened a few years ago. And the question I get routinely is, Ryan, you don't support this because you don't get additional tax revenue. And I said, well, first, my job is a resource to the Board of Education and to the community at large. I don't set policy. I said, that being said, we need to look at data and compare and contrast our community to others as we use economic development tools or we use student development tools in our portfolio. And what does that look like? So an economic development tool for a community that otherwise hasn't had any increasing property value in a decade or more. And it just, I've been here 6 years. I'm talking about the most recent data, but possibly longer. And then when you look at the tax duplicate, so citywide tax duplicate, and you total up the sum of all new construction property, it's really little. And so the question then becomes, did we forego revenue? Well, the data suggests we didn't forego revenue. We didn't have any new construction. And now that we're starting to see some new construction, there's some hopeful return that in 15 years, when those abatements fall off, we'll see those enter our tax duplicate. The other question I get a lot is, do we have room for students? And we've reported on the capacity utilization of the district. We're between 80 and 85% for capacity utilization. We do have some very full buildings, but we have most of our buildings we're able to absorb and take on new students, which come with about $4,800 per pupil as the current formula calls for. So just want to give you a little bit of background about economic development tools, kind of the financial implications, maybe some real talk about that. Again, a lot of community interest in talking through that. So board members, if you feel that we need to do more of a position paper, if we need to make ourselves available, have this conversation with interest groups, you let me know. I'd love to have this conversation with anybody that wants to. Any questions or comments? Mr. Bravo, do I see you coming off of?
No, I have no questions. I do think the conversation is good, and it's probably one worth having in as part of your session without stepping in any landmines or anything, obviously. But it might be worth having, that discussion or a brief presentation. I don't know if you need to waste any time putting it into a paper, but I thought the explanation you just gave is probably good and might be good for a regular meeting setting.
Okay.
When a few more people are paying attention.
Yeah, for sure. Dr. Akbar, I see you off of mute.
Yes. Well, partly I was going to say similar to what Mr. Bravo mentioned about sharing part of that in maybe your report in the board meeting,
Sure.
because there's a lot of, I just got this question yesterday about, if we get the $40 million, then we don't need to, ever have anymore. So I had to share, no, that just means that we may not need to do it right now, but it doesn't mean we never need one because the way the system's set up. And I know you've mentioned that before, but maybe not in detail around housing values and valuations and the way our taxes are set up. So not trying to get you to do a very detailed mathematical equation that's going to probably lose all of us, even on this call, except for probably Dr. Hall, who lives for this stuff. You think the way you explained it was easy enough for pretty much most people to grasp?
I like tying those together, and I'll add that to my board meeting report. Just just like we did, a few minutes update. I like it. Okay, moving on. Unit level analysis. We can go through this if you'd like to. We're nearing the end of the agenda. I think we have some time here, if it's okay. Let me share some screen one more time to figure out how to do it. So one more time, we're going to share screen on district-wide enrollment. So you see the raw data there, scholarship view. Let me get to community schools view. All right, so you see some bar charts there. Only a couple are relevant. What I mean is it's a little bit distracting because you see that ADM listed at the end of each chart. That's school talk for average daily membership. Okay, so you see to the left in the blue, you see community school ADM. This is a really good perspective and a discussion point for where we are in 2021 as a result of COVID, virtual learning versus some districts of in person. Back from 2016 and maybe a few years prior to that, community school on the far left, as you could see, that enrollment was decreasing. Obviously, that's a couple different ways to look at it. One is, I believe, the national and more importantly, the statewide conversation as a result of those ECOT schools, accountability measures, the performance of Akron Public Schools increasing. We were seeing students return to the district. We were really excited to report on those functions. But then look at 2020 to 2021, a really interesting data point there. So community school enrollment is increased. I would say that's a pretty solid clip, larger than any decrease that we had except for 2016 to 2017. And what does that represent? Well, it represents the likelihood that we're not in in-person school, and the thought that other organizations could have a more robust online platform. And so, or it could look like these are in-person community and charters around the area. You've also learned greatly from Mrs. Falk about our responsibilities for transporting. So even though we have decided for student safety to remain virtual, other organizations have decided that that's they're going to do a blend or in person. And we're even providing some transportation for those students in that case. So really interesting data points. To the far right, if we just go to the bookends here, you see the scholarship ADM, that's Ed Choice. And you can see 19 to 20 and 21 at this point is an estimate. It's a really lagging data point, but the growth in 20 to 21 and beyond, that we're expecting consistent growth there. And in the center, you see open enrollment in, pretty steady. Again, 2021 is an anomaly, I think, for everybody, especially Akron, since we're virtual. So open enrollment out, we have a lot less students leaving. So these are really interesting tugs of war at our finances, all of which have really substantial impact. So we're 25 million and above when you total up all these students of the impact that it has on our books. I just wanted to show you some of the components of the forecasting and forecast 5 that we're looking at. So as we look at unit level analysis.
Thank you.
All right. And I have one more item. We covered the master's facility plan with David. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the current APS investment policy versus Neola. I'd like to take that current APS with just a small edit to legal and policy. This investment policy, I had a hand in writing in probably 2015 2015. I think that's when we did it, Mr. Bravo. And it is a little bit more broad than the Neola policy. There's some more shalls and musts in the Neola policy, but this investment policy gives me the flexibility within the confines of law. And so I just want to ensure to you that, albeit it is not as strict an investment policy on the surface, it also has a backdrop to statute which limits U.S. Treasuries, commercial paper, and municipal securities, and that's it. I cannot invest monies out more than 5 years. I just showed you the yield curve. It wouldn't be prudent to do that. What I do need to show you on my investment is a comparison to the other portfolio managers out there. Show you what Star Ohio is yielding, and kind of give you the full return that within the confines of the safety and security of law, we're returning this above and beyond those other institutions. I'd like to push that to legal and policy for any edits they may have.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And in the suggested change that you that's made there, I mean, it does just look like it brings it more in line with what the Ohio Revised Code says. I mean, I'm good with that. I don't have any questions on it. If Diana's good with that too,
we can go to legal and policy and make sure it meets their requirements too.
Yeah.
That is all I had. Any other items for me? I've got some homework to do for the next board meeting, but this is all great stuff, great conversation, feedback, especially on the equity dashboard, advanced APS, in the relating budget process. Diana.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you regarding the advocacy page. I'm just really excited about that. I was looking through it. I didn't get all the way through it. And if it's included in there, then disregard this. But I was wondering if House Bill 920, even though it's way back, somehow included or highlighted, because that's kind of where all of this started as far as the unfair funding. And I think that's an important foundational bill that folks need to know about when they come to visit that. So I know it's not live yet, but
Love it.
That's important.
It needs to be in our opening couple paragraphs. Why do school districts go for new money? House Bill 920. Absolutely. Well, you just gave me the idea. I've seen some treasurer's web pages that start with basics of school funding, some clickable resources right to House Bill 920 and some background. So I'll beef that section up. I like that.
And thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. And Ms. Autry, to your question earlier in the week and to the board about our spending on some of those athletic facilities, I wasn't able to complete that for tonight, but in the very near future, we'll complete that work. So, okay. All right. Well, I know we all have other meetings. Thank you for joining, and thanks for those who are tuning in live.
thank you.
Thanks.
Great.
Have a good
Thanks.
night.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.